Good afternoon, everybody. We'd like to tell you a story. We started off with something that looked very simple. And a wise person once said, for every complex problem, there is always a simple answer. And it's always wrong. And in this case, just because someone in Xerox asked for more sales coaching as the assumed solution, it wasn't necessarily the right thing to do. We're going to cover three things. I call this solutioneering with my clients. When a client comes in and have a very strong passion about what they think the solution is, we need a leadership course. We need a new CRM system. What we're going to show you is how we analysed that performance problem. We discovered that it needed a much more flexible and sophisticated solution. And Daryl and his team used a lot of technology to make that, do it in quite a new way. And this combination of making sure you take a focus on the performance you're trying to achieve rather than the solution at the beginning, and plus technology as an enabler, allowed us to get something which was more continuous in its learning and actually contributed to that improved performance. A case study. Where we started from, I've been training Daryl's learning and development team in a performance consulting approach on how to engage with clients when they come to you and say, we need a training course. What questions to ask them to link it back to the measurable performance. And Daryl rang me and said, I think we've got a classic case of this solutioneering here. The executive from the sales side have just asked me to commission more sales coaching. In fact, they've even got a budget of £650,000. And he thought this was a bit suspicious. Looked like a bit of one of those easy answers. Even though sales coaching had been perceived very well and was delivering results, he was worried that just doing more of it might not be the total solution. He asked me to go down. We identified the key players in the problem, which were the sales executive themselves, and a few of Daryl's team. And we put them in a room, and I took them through this performance consulting process. If you want a copy of this, you can download it from my website. First two bits of the process are, you do not assume anything about the solution. We take it back to the problem and start off by asking who's involved in this problem. It's another assumption that they, whatever these salespeople are, need some sort of sales coaching. The middle bit of the process is to say, okay, now we know who's involved in this sales issue. What are they doing now compared with what we want them to do? And the killer question is, if we didn't do anything about this performance gap, how much would it cost the organization? So right at the beginning of the project, you quantify the performance gap that you're trying to close. And this gives you the data you need for that final evaluation. Everything is now focused on achieving the desired performance, and we haven't considered solutions at all yet. And you'll see in the actual one-day workshop, we then went on to say, for these sales guys working together in this sales system, what solutions will help them close this gap? And it opens your mind up to a much wider range of solutions than just coaching. And the KSME is a short mnemonic for knowledge, skills, motivation, environment. And what tends to happen, I think, is that learning and development people tend to look after the knowledge and skills element, whereas your line managers often need to do a lot of work on the motivational side, the environmental side. And it becomes a joint set of solutions. And you'll see in this case, a lot of different solutions were needed to close this performance gap, which made absolute nonsense of the idea of just doing sales coaching. This was the actual, what I call system diagram, where we drew the people out who were involved. It's not just sales managers. They'd actually changed the whole way they were selling. And we're selling to bigger managers, they had these big pursuit managers, a new role, different sorts of sales managers. This whole system needed to work to achieve the desired performance. In the workshop, I asked the people in the workshop to come up with their ideas about where they felt the different people within this system were now and where they wanted to get them to. a bit of a neater version, we found out that they were in transition from the way they sold. They were selling to bigger customers in a more strategic way. There was quite a disconnect between their targets and the people-driven performance. None of the sales managers had a picture of what this new way of selling really looked like. And the big issue here, the sales managers do not have time to coach. They know what to coach, although they don't know what to coach, and they're not measuring or being rewarded for coaching. What we wanted to see was a clear picture of what good looks like, the business groups hitting their targets, implementing the actual sales. And the cost of the gap was not actually sales. If they carried on doing things the way they would hit a sales target, but they wouldn't move to the new way of selling and capture the growth that they really needed. And we quantified these, but I've taken them off the actual figures. They're their sales figures. There's nothing different when you do a performance gap analysis. You just take the current business people's actual business targets. You don't have to reinvent new ones. And as you'll see, as we moved on, I actually asked them halfway through the day, well, now we've seen this, if we did do more sales coaching, would it help? And the salespeople themselves, the executives, said, no, it could make things even worse because the guys already feel guilty that they haven't got time to do it. And they know it's a good thing to do, but if they felt guilty that they weren't doing it. And these other factors were the major inhibitors stopping the desired performance. So what we came out with, the sort of second half of the day, was, well, what can we do about closing this gap? And they came up with, well, we need guidelines. Part of this vision of the future, they need to know when they're supposed to talk to their people. And I seem to remember it's very simple things like ring your guys up in the morning and ring them in the evening and find out how much they've sold. That is coaching. You should see each, they hadn't thought in that simple terms. They had 4 or 5 sales processes. One consistent sales process. And they wanted coaching themselves. The company was actually using lots of external coaches, and these key senior managers wanted coaching so they could cascade it. And then where the sales induction came in, they wanted that to be more effective, and they wanted managers more involved in induction and in training. So what they came up with, what I was pleased about at the end of that day, I think my bit at the beginning, which was to help them confront this solutioneering, was the sales executive themselves accepted their responsibility for their bits of the actions. And Darryl and his team had accepted responsibility for looking at the induction and hearing the feedback they'd had about it, and looking at it, seeing if they could use new technology and new ways of working to make it a lot more effective and flexible. And both agreed to involve the managers more in the coaching and in changing the behavior. So I'm sorry this isn't an easy answer. And I think in reality, things are more complex. But that's the end of my initial bit, was to help challenge that initial assumption that there was an easy answer. And then Darryl's team took over on the learning and development side.
Thank you, Nigel. So, I'm going to share one part of that case study, knowing the right answer. We know that things along the way. Some of you in the audience part of that. Technology was part of the development of that solution. Before I talk about technology and how it helped us to enable the solution, it's important to understand kind of where we were. And where we were is we were like drug addicts, both as an L&D organisation, but also as a business. We wanted quick fix. I've got a coaching problem, I need sales coach, give me sales coach. And like all good L&D organisations, we wanted to go and help them. We wanted to please the trainers and the training managers. We're happy to do that. Great, I can get somebody in, I can spend some money, we'll solve your problem, we'll get this coaching in. But I know what would have happened. 2-3 years later, we'd been facing exactly the same problem. People saying, managers aren't coaching. How are we going to help them coaching? The induction process isn't working right. Which was one of the reasons that, Nigel's a bit like my drug counsellor. He's helping us to wean ourselves off the quick fix and to address what the real problem was. And it's important, the reason I say that is that, technology is part of the solution, but just putting technology in place, we'd have still been drug addicts. We'd have still been looking for the quick fix in terms of how we were using technology as part of that. So we decided what our technology was going to be. We had a competency-based system. We had Learning Share, which we got some ideas from Peter Butler, who's sitting in the front, was talking this morning. I'll show a bit more about that. And we decided we were going to use Adobe Connect. This was about a year ago. But there are a couple of other things that we needed to think about other than the technology. One was culture in the Xerox organization. And we don't have a learning culture. We're moving towards it, but absolutely we don't have one. But also in L&D, what was our culture within the learning environment? Because trainers love giving training in the classroom. You get instant gratification from it. It's fantastic. You run a course, you feel good, you get those happy sheets at the end. What's not to like about being a trainer as part of that? So we were developing programs that didn't help continuous learning. And the other side that I really spent a lot of time thinking about was the skills. Lord Putnam this morning talked about us being a people-based business. We are. I'm only as good as the skills of my team. So unless I'm investing in the skills of my team to use this technology effectively, we're going to spend all this money on whatever solution it happens to be, we'll still end up with the same poor result and the same problems and not address the real problem as part of that. So just looking at the culture pit first of all, and you've seen various versions of this, we decided to put performance consulting at the heart of what we did. Let's focus everything on performance. If it's not improving performance of the business, we are not doing it. And quite often that stopped us running some courses because the business hadn't fulfilled its part of the bargain. If it hasn't done it, we're not running that courses, and that caused some interesting conflicts, but it was the right thing to do, and they started to understand, actually, these guys are serious about performance. We were totally focused in this area. Everything we did was all around classroom training. The developers were developing classroom training. The trainers loved giving classroom training. It was great, but we weren't thinking about, well, how do we enable the manager to coach? Are we giving them the right tools before a program and after a program to help them do that as part of that? What are we doing to make the experience experiential, the learning experiential? And again, a lot of people will talk about that 70-20-10 as part of that. So we really wanted to rethink how we operated as a group. The other thing that we really needed to think about was innovation and risk-taking. I knew that we weren't innovating, and I knew that because we were making no mistakes. Everything was too safe. So my year start, a year ago, I told everybody, I want you to go and make mistakes. I want you to take risks, because then I will know we're actually trying new things. Learn from that, and you will then start to innovate. And you'll see some of the differences between some of the photos of the groups as we went through this. The other part I talked about was skills. So we spent quite a lot of time enabling people to use the virtual classroom technology as one example, but we spent more of the time on actually enabling their skills, because it does require enhanced skills over delivering in the classroom. You don't have the same cues that you normally would do. One area, visual thinking. How do you make something interactive and engaging? How do you use vocal variation over the phone on a virtual classroom, again, to keep people engaged? How do you keep people engaged when they're not physically there? How do you stop them from doing their email or being distracted onto something else? So again, giving the trainers heightened skills to be able to do that. Because unlike in a classroom, I can't see that Peter's actually dropping off at the moment, so I'm going to go and ask him a question because I know that that will engage him as part of that. You don't have those traditional cues using virtual classrooms or using some of these technologies. So these were important skills to bring into the mix as part of the skills that we were doing. We started off with basically a core team, and we set these up basically to be change agents within learning. We picked the best trainers and we said, right, we're going to invest in you, we're going to invest in this training program to bring up your skills to enable you to use this technology effectively to look at a number of different problems. And they're from all over Europe and focused on different areas of the business. And we're just going to look at one area and 3 guys that were working on one problem, which was the sales induction problem that Nigel was just referring to as part of that. Look at those faces. They're a little bit nervous. This is the end of the week. They're kind of the brave new vanguard that are going out there. That sort of tense, nervous smile of, oh, yeah, we're glad to be here, but we're really not quite sure where we're going. Remember that. We'll come back to them at the end of my slot. So we're looking at this one problem, or one part of this complex problem, and one part of it was induction. And our induction was a 4-week face-to-face program. Part of it was about skills, part of it was about technology, part of it was about value propositions, and so on. But there were some real problems that the business was saying to us about that traditional method of induction in today's environment. One of the problems was time. 4 weeks is a hell of a long time for somebody to be out of the business, away from their customers, not able to engage in sales calls. So you always get that problem, people leaving the classroom to go and, I'm sorry, I've got to leave this afternoon, I've got a customer appointment that I need to go and do, I need to get the business in, my manager's putting me under pressure. Travel, people traveling all over the place, they're away from home, 4 weeks is a long time to be away from your home life, and of course, all of that is very expensive. Every dollar, euro, pound that I'm spending on travel and accommodation, I see as zero value. That's not helping add performance. It's just a cost to my bottom line. So ways that I can make that more efficient means I can spend it on learning and delivering performance to the business. So I was looking for solutions to these problems, but also this one, limited management, engagement, and coaching. You know, the managers had a view of, I send somebody to training and they'll deliver me back an expert and job's done. I don't need to do anything as part of that. So we wanted to build a solution that started to engage the managers and help them understand that they had a really significant role in people's performance as part of that. So the 3 people I showed you earlier, they come up with this thing called Momentum. This was their induction program. The shape of it was an 8-week program, not a 4-week program, but it was quite different because the first 4 weeks were virtual, and I'll talk to you about the shape of the virtual. They had a week of classroom, 2 more weeks of virtual, and then they finished off with a final week in the classroom, culminated in a Dragon's Den event where they were presenting a project that they'd worked on all the way through that program as part of that. And they were supported all the way through by Learning Share, which is effectively as a collaborative workspace as part of that for that group. So that was kind of the concept. In terms of how the virtual classes work, though, of course they weren't sat at their PCs for 4 weeks. We'd do some stimulus at the beginning, so there were 10 virtual classes, probably about 90 minutes long at the beginning. We'd share some knowledge, we'd set up an exercise as part of it, but we wanted to really bring in the experience. So they would then start working through their projects in the workplace. It meant that they can continue to do their day job effectively, but they could practice the skills that they were learning on real-life customers. And the project that they worked on was a real-life sales case study or a real-life sales opportunity. So the sales managers love this. It's suddenly, I can see a real result and a link between what they're doing in the training and hopefully getting performance at the end of the day. By Thursday, they would have a manager review. So the manager was weekly having to now be involved and review and coach people as part of the process. And come Friday, they'd come back together as a group. The trainer would lead a review session and also be testing and practice as part of that. So that was kind of the shape of each of those virtual weeks, and it took them through as part of that. And what we ended up with were people that were better prepared when they came into the classroom. So when they came to that classroom session, they were better prepared, they had better knowledge, and we were able to focus more of the time on practice and skill enhancement as a consequence to that. So we did use technology as a key part of that, but the first part of how people actually saw it was they actually got a diary. It showed them what they would be doing week by week, and this is Tuesday of week 6, and you can see here 9:30 till 10, they were getting set up with a virtual classroom first of all, talk to them about the account management program. They would go away, they'd do a piece of e-learning around account management, and then they would come back and then start to put that into practice, all done virtually. And if you think about the world we live in today and the world that salespeople live in today, they are selling a lot in a virtual environment, using the internet, using the phone as part of that overall solution. We used Adobe Connect as part of the solution for the virtual classes, enabled a lot of interaction. We put a lot of things in place like maximum class sizes for the same reason that you don't have 30 people in a classroom, in a real face-to-face classroom. We did exactly the same thing in a virtual classroom because we wanted interaction. We wanted it to be a learning experience. And we asked the trainers to, when they're developing a program, if you were going to do a syndicate exercise, if you were going to do a lab, do it virtually. So you can do a virtual lab. You can do syndicate exercises and get people to do the same things. Don't suddenly think that this is all about a presentation, a place where a webinar, which is just a one-way. Make it as interactive or more interactive than a real classroom. And all of those skills we invested up front really started to pay dividends. We started off with a very, very basic iteration of a forum that supported it, so people could upload documents, download documents, ask questions of the trainers, get their resources there. Luckily, I spent some time with Peter, and he shared what they were doing at BT, and that started to lead on to our next iteration, which went live in December. So you see some of the similar things that Peter at BT had been doing. So thank you. You saved me about 6 months of mistake making in the process, which was absolutely brilliant as part of that. So what does that mean in terms of results? We went live in September with the program. We're just coming around to the time when we're going to do the actual evaluations in terms of the 6 months afterwards, looking at the real performance of those individuals. So I don't have that data yet. But what I will share is the feedback both from them, but also most importantly from our key stakeholders. The surveys we do are about 60 questions. These are the summaries of the key groupings which are around relevance to role, confidence, improving. And these are the different weeks that are running along here. My expectation, really, was that virtual classrooms were not going to get anywhere near face-to-face classroom in terms of the results. But actually, they were hitting our bench, which is 4 and above, pretty well all the way along. The interesting thing is the only time that it dropped down was actually the week after the face-to-face class when there was a direct comparison between. But even then, even when it got to the latter half, the virtual classes were scoring as highly as the traditional classrooms. And the feedback we were getting was, this is great, I can fit it in around what I'm doing. I'm not spending ages and ages away from the business as part of that. In terms of the benefits to ourselves, increased efficiency as a group. We could deliver more for less. The management engagement and coaching was significantly higher. That normally scored around 3.2. It was our worst performing area. Did your manager engage you before the event on the objectives of why you were going there? Most of the time it was very low. For the first time, it jumped above 4, which to us was a significant step change in terms of how they're engaging. But most importantly was the feedback around faster time to performance. And Peter Taylor, he's the director of this particular business area, and this is the bit that really gets to me. This has undoubtedly resulted in incremental business in 2009, which was a very, very tough year as part of that. And you can probably see from that picture, he's a bit of a scary guy, actually, so he doesn't suffer fools easily. So to get that kind of feedback from him was really great. But the thing for me really was how it empowered the L&D team. This was the team December 2009. This is the latest group. We've put about 40 through now. This is the 3rd group. And you can see this is a team that's not constrained by the economic environment and what's going on. They felt empowered. Suddenly they're liberated. They can use these tools even when people can't fly and travel and go and stay in rooms. They can do things completely differently. And it was the technology that helped to enable that, but it was important to understand the skills part and the culture part were the most important parts. The technology is easy. That's just the hardware. The people are the software. And on that, I'm going to hand back to Nigel to wrap up.
Thanks. Well, if you remember where we came in, the sales executive wanted to spend £650,000 on more sales coaching. If we hadn't have stopped, that's what I call solutioneering, if Darryl hadn't been clever enough to ring me up and say, I'm not quite sure this is right, and just commissioned a one-day confrontation sort of seminar, none of that would have happened. And I'm very proud of what we did, because I think that initial few days enabled the learning people to be part of a team with the managers, and they got permission, actually told, go and do things differently. We don't like the way you've done it before. And they came up with wonderful results using the technology as an enabler. So we wanted to share that with you because we think it's an example of how if you're performance focused and you can use these new tools, you can do something quite new. That's the end of our session. If you want to know more, I think you can get my email and Darryl's from the Learning Skills Group. A special offer for anybody here, if you send me an email, I'll send you a free copy of my Sunday Times paperback. Or if you just want the diagram, you can download it from my website. So, any questions?